All right, everybody, welcome back to the Gentlemanly Things. I am so excited today to welcome Alex from Davidoff Cigars. And we're going to get into our first conversation on the show that's going to be about cigars. And I think Davidoff is such a perfect brand to kick us off with this. A little bit of background, Alex and I met at a local event here in Philadelphia. He was in town promoting Davidoff, and they were doing a pairing tasting between cigars and chocolates. And for me, it was an awesome experience because I had never thought about how cigars go with food. I've done wine with food, I've done whiskey with food, but for me, this was a new experience. Really learning how cigars and food pair together and an experience of how to pull some more flavor out of a cigar that I never even thought of. And I've been enjoying cigars on and off. I would say I'm a casual cigar smoker. That's my background. Let's get into it. Alex, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I am Alex Weghorn. I am the U.S. brand ambassador for Davidoff Cigars here in the United States. So I travel around the country and I get to smoke and talk, and it doesn't suck. I'll tell you that. So basically my job as the brand ambassador, or also known as the brand activation manager. So I will put together our activation program. So fancy word for events. And we will go around the country to the different Davidoff retailers. There's fewer than 300 accounts where we will show up and actually provide, hopefully, that type of experience that really gets people excited, not only about cigars, but about Davidoff cigars. And they can take that information, they can apply it in their day-to-day cigar enjoyment, and really get a feel for not only a lot of people know what they like, a lot of people know what they don't like, but they don't necessarily know why. So there's an important educational piece as part of that. But we also do social activations as well, where it's more just about enjoying the time we're spending with each other. We are all brought together by that great unifier we know as cigars. So it's great to be able to not only do that, but also to get to do different podcasts and media such as this, to be able to help spread that education and be able to share that time beautifully filled with as many people as we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the time you're spending here. I often say this to the listeners. They can choose to spend their time in a lot of different places. We're grateful if they choose to spend it with us. And time is the one great equalizer. No matter how much money you have or don't have, we all have the same amount of time, 24 hours in a day. Mm-hmm. So it's valuable, and we appreciate any time. I certainly appreciate your time to join us today and share your wisdom and a little bit of history about Davidoff. So let's jump into it. Who is Davidoff? For those that don't know, I wasn't ultra familiar with Davidoff before the event. I was lucky enough that a friend of mine who's a large cigar smoker and a member at Cigar Mojo, the account, the location that hosted the event, you guys said one of your the exclusive accounts around the country, was able to host and have you join us. But I wasn't familiar. I just said, sounds like a great place. There's always good people in a cigar room, and there's great conversation that happens. I came into it not knowing what to expect. I wasn't as familiar with Davidoff, but quickly fell in love with them, and you were a big part of that. So who is Davidoff? What's a brief snapshot of their history, and what's one of maybe the things you love most about the company you work for?
So 1906, let's start there. Zino Davidoff, our founder, was born, and in 1911, his father, who was already a tobacconist at the time, moved the family from outside Kiev, Ukraine, to go to Geneva, Switzerland, and he started the first Davidoff of Geneva store, and proud to say that store is still open and operating even to this day. So Zino grew up in that lifestyle and really wanted to learn as much as he could. So in 1924, at the age of 18, he left. He went to Central and South America and spent as much time as he possibly could to learn as much as he could about tobacco and premium tobacco and cigars in general. So he spent 6 years bebopping around and came back in 1930. One of the things he actually realized very quickly was how differently cigars in Switzerland were tasting and performing compared to when he was in Cuba, Argentina, Brazil, and some of those other countries. And he very quickly realized that it was the environment that made such a big difference. So he was actually the one who invented the humidor. So every single cigar enjoyer around the world has to take advantage of this particular invention that Zino made. And it was the desktop humidor, as well as a humidified storage area in the basement of that original store. So we owe a lot to Zino, whether we know it or not, when it comes to cigar enjoyment. So if we fast forward a little bit, go to 1968, at that time, it was still just the one shop. And Dr. Ernst Schneider, who was the president of the Max Ottinger Group, who was a very, very dear friend of Zino, actually bought the Davidoff of Geneva location. So at this point, it was his vision, along with Zino, to truly globalize the brand. So at first, they were just selling Cuban cigars. Now it was about creating that cigar brand that we all know and love. So that's when we first saw that oval band go onto a cigar. And it was actually the Cuban government who had talked to Zino about how those cigars would be made. And they offered up El Legido, which is the Cohiba factory in Havana, as the place to do that. And that was a very tempting offer to Zino. But he said, I have 4 caveats, very, very important. Number 1, I have to control all the blending. Number 2, I have to control the packaging and distribution. Number 3, I have to control the marketing. But 4th, and very importantly, I have to have control and final say on the quality control and the consistency processes and procedures. So the Cuban government said okay, and the Cuban at the time, Davidoff cigars were born. So then we'll fast forward another 20-ish years to about 1988, and the quality at that time was really, really suffering. And Zino actually had over 130,000 Cuban-made Davidoffs destroyed out of the inventory because he didn't feel that the quality was what it should be for what his expectations were. His name is on every single cigar that is involved with the brand, as one might expect. So that started that conversation back in that late 80s time frame to make that move away from Cuba and go over to the Dominican Republic. And we did so and started distributing cigars out of the factory in Santiago, DR in 1991. So when you do that, obviously you can't use Cuban tobacco anymore because you're not in Cuba, and you're now opening up the U.S. market, which still has the embargo. So a lot of those blends at that time had to be retooled and figure out how to accomplish those palates that we were trying to satisfy with Dominican tobacco. And so after that, only 3 short years later, unfortunately, Zino passed away. And it was at that time where the rest of the company really took that Davidoff legacy and has continued to carry that torch since then to make sure that we're keeping that consistency and quality control at the ethos of the brand. It's not only about the maintenance of that, but also to help push the innovation as well. So a lot of people who do know Davidoff, they like to find those limited editions we come out with. And we've done some core innovation since then, but a lot of the limited editions are also very unique blends that people seek out. But keeping that Davidoff legacy alive is all about what we're about: consistency and quality control. That's what we hang our hat on.
That's quite a history, right? Over 100 years of history, and then really from the beginning to the launching point you said about the mid 50s and 60s,
and still going strong.
jumping past the wars and watching the evolution of it happen. Right, the company, I love that you kind of talked about continuing to learn, continuing to evolve, respecting that quality and having that threshold, right, of making sure that everything meets the standard that we want to put the Davidoff name on it. And not every company can maintain that for that long. So I think that's really a true testament to one, the founder, Zino, and his vision, but then also being able to communicate that vision down and have it carried forward even past his passing, and the legacy of his name on it is fascinating. So appreciate that history. It's again, like I said, coming in, not even knowing the name Davidoff, because
in the first place,
I don't see them all the time. And quickly, that story I think helps to cement what the cigar I had in my hand that night was all about. And I think you have one sitting next to you that if I record this in a space where I can't be enjoying it, but you're in the Davidoff studio and headquarters. So by all means, if you want to have that enjoyment while we talk, please
I
don't
would
be
love
shy
to.
about it.
Appreciate that. I'll go ahead and do that now.
Absolutely. And then you could tell us about what you have. So it looks like that's a fresh stick you have there. Have you cut it already?
I have not, no. And actually, I'm actually going to toast this cigar before I cut it. So,
okay. If everybody's got their own, I think, approach, and I'm sure in your industry, as in mine, there's everybody believes there's a different right way to do something. So, right is what I always say, right or best is what works to solve for you. So tell us about what your ritual is here.
So a big part of what we do when we enjoy cigars is we're enjoying time. And the tagline, the slogan for Davidoff is time beautifully filled, right? So time is what we are all about. We already talked about how it's the one thing everybody wants more of and money can't buy. And it's the most important thing we have is to be able to have more time when we can to enjoy some of the finer things, right? Especially a gentleman, in my opinion, is somebody who provides quality but seeks quality. And to get as much out of whatever it is they're doing or enjoying at the time is what we should aspire to. And this is a great way to take a little bit more time with your cigar, with your cigar ritual. So what I'm doing right now is using a soft flame lighter to actually toast the cigar first. And the outer parts of the cigar will start to go from that dark brown to black to that gray ash. And then you use your cutter to take the cap off. And there's a couple reasons for that. So primarily being using a soft flame lighter, you want tobacco to burn as cool as possible. And when you use a jet, that will superheat that tobacco, and dry tobacco burns harshly. So if you're using a soft flame lighter, that takes some of that heat away while still doing the job. But also, if you wait to cut your cigar, then you're actually not allowing any of the smoke to run through the body of the cigar and impact the tobacco before you take your first draw.
So I think I've never considered that, but it all theoretically makes perfect sense to me. And I think I now have a new way to update my ritual and something to teach people as I actually plan to enjoy a cigar a little bit later today with a contact of mine that's a old friend. We've lost touch and we've reconnected recently and said, hey, let's catch up. So we're going to go to the Union League here in Philadelphia and
awesome.
Meet and sit in the cigar lounge where other gentlemen will probably be hanging out. And I think one of the things we talked about the night you were here in Philly was, time. And I think you just alluded to it here, taking your time, enjoying your time. And things I love about, drinking a nice bottle of whiskey, smoking a nice cigar is you can't do them quickly. And you don't want to do them quickly, right? You want to take.
You can, but you probably shouldn't.
Yeah, you could, right? Yeah, you could drink that whole bottle pretty quickly. A cigar is hard to smoke quickly.
Yeah,
you can't just suck it down. but some cigars do smoke, more quickly than others. Mm-hmm. But I think the appeal, right, of enjoying a cigar is that you're actually carving out time to step back, to sit and relax, to have those conversations with somebody, or to have those conversations with yourself in your head, right? Just taking that time to disconnect and reflect. If you aren't doing it in a social occasion, I know a lot of guys that'll sit after work and sit with a whiskey and a cigar on their back porch and just enjoy the environment they're in. And then others are going to go and do it in that social environment at their local club or at the cigar bar, or have a friend over with them. So, but either way, it's about time, and you're carving out that time. You're stepping away. You're reflecting. You're sharing. If it's socially, you're sharing that time and sharing stories and other things related to how we live our life around the finer things.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong. Sorry to interject real quick, but I want to make sure I remember to say this. Do I expect somebody to do this method? A method I originally learned as the 3-match lighting technique. Gordon Mott from Cigar Aficionado did a video actually at our Madison Avenue store some time ago. And I saw this video and I'm like, wow, this makes so much sense to be able to slow down your ritual. And it is a ritual when it comes to enjoying premium cigars. And it's not just the act of taking your torch and scorching the hell out of your cigar and getting it fired up. That said, the majority of the time, a torch lighter is going to be your weapon of choice, right? Very convenient. It does the job. It does the job quickly, but enjoy with intent is something I say at all the events I do, all my activations. I'm very big about enjoying with intent, and cigars are the great unifier. They're the great equalizer. So you can be around people from different races, religions, socioeconomic backgrounds, creeds, whatever, the big stuff, right? People you may otherwise never had the opportunity to interact with. And it doesn't matter who you are, what you believe in. We're all the same when we have a cigar in our hands, and we all have had so many friendships and relationships start with the question, what are you smoking? So it does become a social event, as you already mentioned. And brick and mortar retailers, doesn't matter if it's a lounge, bar, whatever the case, do a great job of building that community and camaraderie in their space. People are showing up after work. They have a cigar with their buds. They're talking crap with each other. Maybe it's a weekend. They're yelling at the TV because their team is losing or bonehead play, whatever it is. So when you want to get the most out of the cigar and the time and the money you're spending on that experience, enjoy with intent, think about what that cigar is giving you, and that all starts with the ritual.
Love it. And you said something in there. The question we ask each other is, what are you smoking? Mm-hmm. Right. And it made me think of the equalizer you're talking about. I had an occasion as the presidential election was happening. We had quite a few events here in Philadelphia. And our store happens to be down the block from where one of the candidates ended up staying. And so there was a ton of police activity. Streets were closed for blocks all around. There was the inspection tent set up where they were putting the mirror under the car. They had the dogs, cops everywhere. But I was walking back from lunch one day, and one of the guys, a police officer in plain clothes, leaning against a building, smoking a cigar. And I walked by. I said, well, what are you smoking? Right. And my lead into that was to have a conversation with him, because I was curious about what was going on. Right. All the gawking of, hey, who's here? What's going on? What do you guys have to deal with? What are the security protocols? But I started the conversation with him by asking about the cigar that was in his hand. Yeah. And then he actually opened up with me. He said, well, this is the candidate that's here, and this is what we have to do. And my job's done. I'm just, sitting here waiting for the next thing to come in, and I'm enjoying my smoke. And, we talked about, what his role was in Philadelphia. This happened to be a local guy, not a government official that was traveling with the entourage. But, it was a fun conversation that gave me more insight into what was going on probably a little bit of a peek behind the security curtain than the regular passerby might have otherwise gotten. I was dressed in a sport coat, probably looking a little bit more trustworthy, that I wasn't asking questions to cause any harm, right?
Right, you're
as
not
well.
too deeply.
Exactly. So the way I showed up and the way I approached him and the question, but it started with that question, what are you smoking?
What are you smoking?
And he said he had that ritual of his as well. So just kind of funny stories of where that shows up in your life. But let's go back a second. When you were talking about the selection of the tobacco, the blending of the tobacco, what goes into that? So, my first education on cigars, when I started learning about that, opened my eyes. But talk a little bit about the tobacco plant, how you guys utilize it, what you select, what the blending process looks like. I know that's probably a 30-minute answer, but let's chunk it down a little bit and just cover some of the basics for somebody who's new to cigars, why it matters, and how that starts to affect the different quality of what you get.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, at least for Davidoff, we have something called crop to shop, and that's our vertical integration strategy. So the idea is we want to have as much control over every step of the process as possible. So if we're actually talking about the Dominican tobacco we grow on our farms, we work with 50 different farms in 15 different growing regions around the Dominican Republic. And so if we're talking about that tobacco, we're talking about starting in our seed bank. So you have a seed bank that is all different types of tobaccos, and we have primarily Dominican tobaccos we're focusing on in country, but we're only taking the top 10% most viable seeds. And if you know what a tobacco seed looks like, it is almost microscopic. They are tiny, tiny, tiny. But we are able to measure them. So the largest ones and the heaviest ones are deemed the most viable. So that's what's actually going into the ground. And so you're talking about making sure they have a perfect environment to start off when they're just planted in individual little trays. And as they germinate and get larger, once they're ready to go into the ground, they get transplanted out to one of these 50 different farms. And so as that growing season is happening, our agronomists on staff will travel out multiple times every single week and work with those farmers to make sure that harvest is as perfect as possible, to the point where we are measuring the different nutrition in the soil and making sure that that's maintained properly, adjusting irrigation strategies based on local weather patterns on a daily and weekly basis. So tobacco is a very hardy plant. It needs a lot of nutrition. It also needs a lot of water, but you can drown it. So there is that perfect balance you need to try to maintain, and Mother Nature can sometimes help and can sometimes be a little bit of a detriment, particularly with hurricanes coming through, and that poses plenty more problems than just tobacco, right? But we actually work with these farmers in such a way where we will sign exclusive leases where we are providing them, we give them those plants to grow, and then we buy back our own tobacco. Because these are exclusive leases, they are not able to grow tobacco for anybody else or sell our tobacco to anybody else. So when we buy back our own tobacco, that helps sustain that family of farmers through the entire year to be able to sustain until it's the next growing season. So we're going to go for it. Yeah.
I just want to clarify. So the farmer's only job is take care of the plant, right?
Indeed.
They don't have to source the plant. They don't have to, deal with the seeds. You guys are basically giving them the plant, putting it in the ground. Do they monitor the soil, or you guys are monitoring the soil, or is it a combination of
It is a combination of both. Yes, they are monitoring and making sure, and then we have our agronomists that will work with them. They're taking their measurements, and we actually provide any type of supplementation needed to make sure that that level of nutrition is maintained through the harvest season.
Love it. So really by buying back the tobacco, you're buying their service, their attention, their expertise of the farm, right?
Absolutely.
And they don't have to worry about, did I get a bad crop of seeds did I, will they grow, will they not? Because they know they're getting only the most viable from you that have potentially even already germinated.
Yes, yeah, they are already starting to grow, and they've already been maintained to the point where they have a solid root system to go into the ground. So that's already done for them. So then we have to harvest that tobacco, and the way we harvest is through priming. So you can have stock cut or you can have primed tobacco. If you're cutting the stalk, then all of that tobacco comes at once. But if you prime, like what we do, is we will take the first 2 leaves from the bottom part of the plant, and then we wait 3 days. Then we take the next 2 leaves, wait another 3 days. Each one of those is called a cut. So as you harvest, you do all the cuts and you get to the top of the plant. So that allows those upper leaves more time on the stalk. They have more sunlight. They don't have to fight for water and nutrition against those leaves that are on the bottom because those are gone. So they can develop more flavor, more character, more spice, more nicotine all the way through. Now, once that happens, then we go to our curing barns. We have a 45-day curing barn scenario where we will actually hand sew 2 leaves back to back, and then we hang them on sticks called kuhe. And when we hang those during that curing process, that's when all the water starts to leave the plants, and they go from that really nice green to a yellow to light brown and to a darker brown. And to make sure that is happening in a consistent basis throughout the entire curing barn, we actually have to rotate those kuhe all the way through from the bottom up to the top. And at that 45-day mark, all of the tobacco is at the same level of curing to go into fermentation. And this is really where a lot of that Davidoff kind of special qualities start to come through, is that fermentation. Because the way I describe it to people is our fermentation is like the best barbecue in the world, low and slow. So longer periods of time at lower temperatures to make sure that all of the naturally occurring ammonia in the tobacco can leave, make sure the structure of the tobacco itself breaks down, because fermentation happens when microorganisms are actually breaking down the leaves. And you need heat, humidity, and volume to be able to do fermentation properly. And so we'll have these really, really large bales called pilons. And they're almost as tall as I am. Not that I'm the tallest guy in the world, but that is a lot of tobacco, and that volume pushes towards the middle. And the internal temperature will raise up. So we have thermometers stuck in the middle of these pilons, and we have to annotate that temperature every single day. And so once we get towards our upper thresholds, we have to shuffle the deck, if you will, and cool that tobacco down and kind of restart that fermentation. So we take the burlap off the top, we grab a handle of tobacco, we shake it, and we put it down on the pallet right next to the original pilon. And that takes 4 people roughly 32 hours to do one time. So after our roughly 8 month average first fermentation run, that's happening 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And the tobacco is going to tell us when it needs to happen, right? So as that fermentation activity continues to happen and drive that temperature up, that's when we're doing that flip. We're not doing it before, and we're not letting it go too long. So every harvest is going to be a little different. So we have to be very attentive to what the tobacco is telling us. But we do that for quite some time, and it is very manual labor intensive.
So it's a temperature threshold that determines when that gets done, right? I'm understanding that correctly?
Correct, yes. And also even the speed at which that temperature is rising. So from one day to the next, if you have a 2-3 degree jump, that's one thing. But after a couple rounds of flipping that pilon, maybe from one day to the next, it's going up half a degree, or it's staying the same and it takes a couple days and that fermentation is slowing. Now that tobacco is really getting to the point where it's hitting its limitation, and it's time to put that tobacco into aging for the next 4, 5, 10, 15 years, however long is needed for that tobacco.
So I've got a couple questions that are going to come out of this.
Mm-hmm.
One question I had in my mind earlier is, from the time they cut it off the plant till the time it ends up rolled in a cigar that you could smoke like you have, what's that time period? How long does that take?
So it's going to be different for certain blends. It's not going to be the same across the board. But as an example, for any of our four core blends for Davidoff, those are our white bands. That's going to be Signature, Grand Cru, Anniversario, or Millennium. The average age on that tobacco, once you have a final product, is 5.5 years.
Okay.
But
So
you have certainly any of the more limited edition cigars that have special tobaccos, special blends put together, you can have a lot more aging. For example, we just had the Escurio 10th anniversary blend launch in April of this year, and the cumulative age on that tobacco is 45 years. So if you take all the different tobaccos and you add up their ages, that's what's going to be that 45 years. But for example, that wrapper leaf alone is 9 years.
okay, yeah, I think that for the novice cigar smoker, the idea that exists probably is not even in their head. I would have never thought, oh, it's got to go through this whole process. I didn't know about it, prior. When I started learning about fermentation, to me, fermentation is a term for alcohol, not for cigars, right? And so the other question that came to my mind is fermentation to me, and my knowledge base at this, going into what I know about fermentation is yeast eating sugar and outputting alcohol.
Right.
And I know that the connection I can make in that is I know that produces heat. I've been in a distillery, I've been over an open fermentation tank, and when you stick your hand over it, it produces CO2 and heat. And one of the distilleries I was in, they had us lean over the fermentation tank and take a breath. You almost can't breathe because the CO2 is so much. It
can be significant.
It was really an interesting exercise when I did it. It was like, this was a, 85,000 gallon fermentation tank at a huge distillery. And I've been in 20,000 gallon fermentation tanks where it's a little bit more of a boutique distillery. But either place, you feel the heat, and if you stick your head over and try to breathe, it's one of the most unique feelings I had ever felt. So when you're talking about
of putting that, very gentlemanly of you.
Yeah, thank you. So when we talk about fermentation in tobacco, is it the same process? Is yeast involved? What's it outputting? How does the fermentation happen in tobacco? That's different than alcohol, which is probably the more common fermentation people know about.
Yeah, it is there are microorganisms. They're not yeast specifically, but they are microorganisms that are doing the work. But particularly once you get towards the beginning part, you'll have mainly ammonia is the smell you're associating with fermentation, right? There is a lot of naturally occurring ammonia in raw tobacco, so you have to get rid of that. And that's personally, I'm not the biggest fan of using the word smooth to describe cigars. However, most people out there do seek a smoothness with their cigars. You don't want harsh. You don't want that kind of abrasive feeling in the back of your throat. So that's one of the reasons why with Davidoff, it doesn't matter if it's a milder blend like a Signature or something that's got a lot more robust flavors and strength to it, like a Yamasa or one of our Maduros, what I'm enjoying right now, or maybe the Winston Churchill, the late hour, something that's got more oomph to it. You can always associate the word smooth with it because we have taken the time to put into that fermentation and the aging process. We haven't even talked about the aging or the rest of the cigar production, but it's really that fermentation and getting the ammonia out. And that's why you need to have older tobacco to really have a lot of those more balanced and delicate and nuanced flavors as well, even if you have something that has a little bit more character and intensity.
If you didn't get that ammonia out, would it be harmful? Like, ammonia is not a great chemical we want to be putting in our body, I have to imagine. Is it the same ammonia as you think about, like a house cleaner ammonia, or is there a difference?
So you're not going to get a cigar that's going to be have that level of ammonia in it, right? You will have fermentation that's done for all premium tobacco, so you will get a lot of that out of that tobacco. So it's not going to taste or smell like ammonia as a cleaning product. Now, if you're going into one of the drying rooms when you're dealing with that partially fermented tobacco, smell-wise, yeah, it is ammonia right to the face, and it is intense, and it's very, very harsh. But from a cigar enjoyment standpoint, you won't get something like that.
Okay. And the connection I'm making here is somebody who bootlegs their own whiskey and doesn't know how to cut the hearts from the heads and the tails. And that's why, moonshine, in its case, moonshine just being, homemade, backyard, unaged whiskey back in the day, had such a, I guess, skew to it, right? Is because people didn't know how to make it the right way. Mm-hmm. Essentially, they were ingesting, home cleaning product level alcohols that are not good for the body, that the body can't break down, and poisoning themselves. And I'm wondering if somebody, went and tried to make their own cigar and didn't actually go through the steps the right way, if the same kind of consequence would happen out of that. And that's the connection, right? And just to kind of fill you in where my head was at. But it's interesting. I don't know how many people are out there trying to bootleg their own cigars the way they would bootleg whiskey back in the day.
I mean, there's definitely people, just regular consumers, who are super cigar nerds like myself, and they really love the lifestyle and want to learn more about it. So they learn how to roll, and so they will purchase raw leaf. Generally speaking, they're not getting raw leaf that has not been fermented and aged for at least some amount of time. So I don't think you would ever get that, even if you're a home roller, if you will. Now, that said, if somebody is rolling cigars just at their house and trying to sell those cigars and make a business, that's pretty tough to do, because you're also talking about volume, right? Unless you're doing specific events, something along those lines. But if you're trying to just roll at home like that and talk about the volume, and again, the consistency, that's what Davidoff is all about. And one of the big things about Davidoff is, just as a roller, to be able to attempt your first Davidoff cigar, you have to have a minimum of 10 years rolling experience. So if you're at home, that's hard to get that level of consistency and quality out of your cigars. But even some manufacturers, a 10-year experience might be more of a master level. For us, that's entry level. Now, we do have master rollers of our own, and they have to have a minimum of 15 years experience and prove themselves above and beyond the Davidoff quality standards, right? And in our entire rolling floor, we only have 8 master rollers. So they are genuinely some of the most skilled, best cigar rollers in the world. And they're the ones that are producing the limited editions. They're doing something like the Maduro, like what I have right here, that Escurio 10th anniversary, our Royal releases, which is a super premium in terms of price point. That tobacco is at least 11 years old by the time it's actually hitting the market. Or something as special as our Oro Blanco Special Reserve 111. Cigar where the cumulative age on all of those tobaccos is 111 years. So that is a lot of time. Once again, we get back to time. It's not just what's going into the tobacco, but also into the people. And the people is where this industry is. Doesn't matter if it's a consumer, we were talking about the social aspects, or the production. People are the lifeblood of what we do. There's 300 hands that are involved with the production of our cigars, and that consumers is 301, right?
I love that.
So, and to get back to the master rollers real quick, they're producing those types of cigars, but the volume isn't quite there. There's not as many cigars rolled. So they're a huge part of our supervisory core. And every single Davidoff cigar, before it leaves the rolling floor, is actually inspected by no fewer than 7 supervisors. So what are they looking for? Why does it matter that they're being looked at, right? So if they're inspecting the cylinder itself, the construction of the cigar, they're making sure it's not overpacked or underpacked, no divots or bulges in the cigar. It's nice and uniform all the way through. if there's a problem with the wrapper leaf, they're checking for any cracks or blemishes, making sure the cap sits perfectly on top of the cigar. If there's a problem with the wrapper leaf, you can remove that and replace it with another half leaf, but you want to avoid that as much as possible because wrapper leaf is the most expensive. But it's fixable. But if there's a problem with the cylinder, they will actually take that cigar and break it in half. It cannot be fixed, so it cannot be used as a premium long filler cigar. It can go for short fill or medium fill, and it can be chopped up into smaller pieces and used for a smaller format cigar that uses that type of tobacco, but it will not be a premium Davidoff cigar. And one of the very big feathers we have in the Davidoff cap is we have less than a 1% rejection rate from our rolling floor. So we're doing all that work, we're spending that time making sure that any cigar that's not as perfect as humanly possible doesn't even get to the resting rooms. And those resting rooms have those cigars that are sitting there for months and months and months to make sure that once they are ready to be packaged and put into a box and shipped to one of our global markets and reach one of our Davidoff retailers around the world, that it is going to be as perfect as possible. And those flavors have come together to maintain that blend consistency, because we want a fresh box from 5 years ago to taste like a fresh box now, and that fresh box 5 years from now will taste the same as well, because that consistency is what you're looking for when you decide to enjoy a Davidoff cigar.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, there's so much that you just touched on, and so many questions of we could talk for hours and hours, and maybe we have to do a part 2 on this, down the road. But let me go back a little bit. You were talking about the weather, the soil, the farms, the monitoring of that. Are there vintages? Do vintages exist in cigars the same way vintages exist in wines, or is it always blended?
A little bit different, but you can certainly do that. And a lot of it, I mean, much like wine, a lot of that depends on what happened that year, right? So, right. For example, when we had the first version of our Oro Blanco come out, that was the 2002 harvest was an exemplary year in the Dominican Republic in terms of that crop and what happened during that growing season. So all of that tobacco in that blend was from that 2002 harvest. So incredibly limited in what your production is because it was just that 1 year.
Yeah.
There are other manufacturers out there or other companies who will also attach a year to a particular blend because they are highlighting what went on in that year. So, for example, one of the brands we work with, we're a distribution partner, and we work closely with Ferio Tego, Michael Herklotz, and Brendan Scott, the principals of Ferio Tego. They have the Elegancia, the Generoso, and the Suma as their flagship blends, and they have the Generoso and the Elegancia that have a band on there that says which year that's representing where that's from. And so you have blends that are close to each other, but they're not going to be exactly the same. And that highlights how special those blends are and how they kind of mature and turn into this nice little morsel of what that year gives you. So you can have different theories on or methodologies, if you will, on how you want to treat specific vintages or growing seasons in your crops.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you will occasionally see it, but it's more rare.
You're not always doing it. It's not quite done like it is in the wine world. Yeah.
Okay. So all right, great. I could dig more and more into that. I think we'll talk offline because that's my own curiosity, and I think less pertinent maybe to some of the background that we're laying today. But the other things you were talking about, the time, the attention, how many hands touch it, how long it takes to really master the trades. It reminds me a lot of tailoring as well. A master tailor, to be considered a master tailor in traditional tailoring typically was about 20 years of learning the craft. Okay. And so, talking about a master roller, being minimum 10 years for you guys, and then more and more from that, and only having 8 of them, the amount of years, the amount of time it takes. So one thing I often share about clothing, handmade clothing, is typically 45, 50, 60 hours of work that goes into it. Whereas your more mass-produced clothing on the lowest end of the spectrum is 90 minutes from start to finish for a suit. And when you compare 90 minutes, the delta of 90 minutes to 60 hours or more, a single tailor working on something, if he's not quick, could take up upwards of 80 or 90 hours on a garment as well. That's the same delta as tobacco going 2 years versus going 15 years, in the ratio and comparison of it, and how to learn that skill, right? So, the guy making the 90-minute suit is using a lot of machinery and automation, and the guy making the 60-hour suit is doing it all by hand.
Is using chalk and scissors and hand thread,
needle, thread, and thimble, on every piece of the garment, and at best maybe one straight needle machine for the long seams, because you don't do all those by hand. And part of the appeal of handmade clothing is it's not always perfect. You're going to get some of that, character and intricacy that finds its way into it, where you don't expect it to be perfect, but you expect the fit to be perfect, but maybe a buttonhole stitch, is a little bit off here and there, or the spacing between the stitches is, could be an 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch different, but there's differences to it that are so minute. When you step back and look at the whole thing, it's a masterpiece. And if you want to really kind of look at it under a microscope, you could find imperfection, but the imperfections are part of what make it, as beautiful as it is.
And you have to like really be looking for that too, because it's to the point where those types of artisans, and they are artisans, doesn't matter if you're talking about suits or if you're talking about cigars, when you're putting those together, there is an art form to it. And it's like every single one that is made is a one of one. They are not prints. They are one of one piece of art. And even though the goal is to make them as perfect as possible, and that's one of the reasons why we have our supervisors doing their thing, you want it to be as perfect as possible, but it is still very much a handmade product. And the skill set you have to have, that perfection, that level of attention to detail, also comes with a price point, certainly, too. And you see that across any industry, right? So to be able to get to that point where you can enjoy something like that is really nice. And in my opinion, anybody can afford it. It's a matter of how often you are able to and want to afford that. But it doesn't matter the frequency. If somebody chooses to spend their money on something like that product, and if you're spending the time to earn that money or to enjoy that product once you have purchased it, it should be as perfect as it humanly possibly can.
Yeah, I agree, right? And the imperfections I'm speaking about with clothing are really just kind of the pieces that come on the look. You should expect a 60-hour handmade custom suit to fit you perfectly, right? So what it feels like on your body, what it looks like when it drapes, that should be perfect. The stitching detail may have some imperfection in it, but the imperfect is part of what makes it perfect for my industry. For your industry, I love what you were talking about. If it's got a dimple on it, it doesn't make it past inspection, right? And really the comparison, I think, is the time and intention that's what's linking the two together. Is a cigar doesn't just happen in a factory that's pumping out hundreds of thousands of cigars a day, for mass consumption. That's not a Davidoff product. That happens elsewhere in the industry. But what you're sharing about minimum time of fermentation, and then we haven't even talked about aging yet, which I want to get to because I'm fascinated in that aspect of it as well. But even everything we've talked to up to this point, you see the time, you see the attention, and bringing that to the level of the surface for education for the listeners here, I think helps give it a better appreciation. Part of our approach, and I shared in an earlier episode about our core values. One of our core values is be learned, and we talk about why learning is important and how do we share what we know with others to help them learn, and how do we learn from them, and we call it a transfer of knowledge in that sense. But
absolutely,
in clothing especially, I kind of noticed early on that nobody's going to pay $5,000 for a suit if they think it's the same thing as the $500 suit, right? If they don't know that the $500 suit took 90 minutes and the $5,000 suit took 50 hours, and they don't know all the other ins and outs of the details of how it comes together, they're never going to consider it. Once they know what to consider in each purchase. And I think, an education like that with cigars also goes a long way, understanding all these components that get it from the seed stage all the way through, what the stick ends up in your hand that you can enjoy. So, I love bringing that to the surface and giving people the insight of what to consider, because ignorance is bliss sometimes, but if ignorance in other cases is, you just don't know what you don't know, and then it can affect your enjoyment of something that
absolutely
would otherwise be enjoyable, and in some cases, if they were making the right selections for it.
Developing an appreciation for something. I think a great example of this, just a personal anecdote, was my first experience with a peated Scotch. I mean, my girlfriend at the time, thank God she loved peated Scotch, because I was watching Parks and Rec, big Ron Swanson fan, and if you've seen almost any episode where he's in it, which is pretty much all, he's got his Lagavulin 16, and I'm like, okay, I like Scotch, I like whiskeys, I'd like to learn more. I've never had this before. I went all in and I went ahead and bought a bottle. Never having a peated Scotch before. So I open this thing, I pour myself a small taste, and it is like gasoline. It is formaldehyde. It is, in my opinion, at the time, my palate was horrible. And I'm like, how can anybody appreciate something like this? And so then I was able to play it off and say, hey, honey, I got you this really nice bottle of whiskey that I know you like. So over time, as I learned more about it and learned how to appreciate it, I was able to start enjoying it a lot more. And then not only that, having other peated Scotches and trying out the different flavor profiles. It's not just this one-trick pony of peat and smoke. So now I have a range of Lagavulin, and I have a range of other peated Scotches as well. So it's about taking the time to pay attention to what the product is and what your enjoyment is, and figuring out more about it to be able to become more learned, more well-versed in whatever it is, and figuring out how that can play a part in your enjoyment and elevating whatever that moment is where you're having it, either by yourself or with others.
Yeah, I have a huge smile on my face as you're telling that story. You don't even know this. The last episode of this show, I did a whiskey tasting.
Okay.
I focused on Scotch, and one of the four that I picked was Lagavulin 16.
Oh, no way!
and I referenced Parks and Rec. So
I love it. Full circle. Nice callback.
Full circle, and that was just the episode right before this one. Just really kind of a funny appeal to that.
Guys, this was such a great conversation with Alex. I didn't want to leave a single thing out of it for you. So we're going to split this episode into 2 parts. I hope you'll join us next week, where we're going to finish out this conversation. Don't miss out. If you really enjoyed part 1, please join us next week for part 2. And in the meantime, give us a like, please subscribe and share. Follow us on all the channels so that you get the updates when these new episodes are released. And I really appreciate the comments you guys are leaving. So we look forward to seeing you next week on part 2 of Davidoff Cigars with Alex Weghorn. See you then.